Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to Seoul to speak on the topic of pseudo-work. The book came out in Danish in 2018. It's been translated to many languages also, including Korean, for a couple of years ago, and had a great success in this country, which I'm very grateful for. And I'll also, in my presentation, maybe give a few hints about why was it also very popular in Korea, which sort of challenges about modern life is not only relevant from where I come from, Denmark, but also a country like Korea. So I'm an anthropologist. I've written 9 books, fiction and non-fiction, and I wrote Pseudo-Work with Anders Fogh Jensen, who is a philosopher. In 2018, I worked as a consultant for many years. And actually, the first story I'd like to begin with was when I was working as a consultant, because that's the first time I realized that sometimes some of the work we do is a bit puzzling. I remember I was standing doing a presentation for a crowd, not as big as this, but a smaller group, and I was working as a consultant, and after I'd done the presentation, I had to take a selfie of myself, because in the back office, they had decided that we should have an intranet where consultants could post whatever they were doing. I'm not sure anybody ever read what was on the intranet, but we had to do it. So I took the picture and I thought everything was fine until I returned to the office. They told me that I'd been doing things all wrong, because they could see from my selfie and the presentation in the background that I had been using a PowerPoint template that was 2 years too old, because we have changed the templates. I'm not sure my customers realized that. I surely didn't. But I had to listen to a meeting where they talked about the importance of alignment. Every consultant should use the same type of PowerPoint. Otherwise, the customer would notice it. I'm pretty sure the customer would not notice this, because that's not what's relevant for the customer if they saw another consultant using a different PowerPoint presentation. But that was important because we had a corporate identity. Customers expected gold standards. There was an idea that if we slacked, here it would spread. So we had to make sure that every PowerPoint deck we made was with the same colors. And I'm an anthropologist, so I studied in science, and I could not find any peer-reviewed article that would somehow support the message from the communications team that this was important. Because as a consultant, I was out there making the money that they were spending in the back office. We knew that we had happy clients, and we knew that I was working many hours every week. And if I were to spend more time on updating templates, there would be less time for me to see my family, but there would also be less time to see clients. So that's why I tried to insist to the people in the back office, why is this a good idea? I even came to the point where I was thinking, do you have too much time on your hand in the back office? Is that why you do this? Is that why you reinvent the colors every second year? Because nobody else can relate to this. And I did not protest, but I wrote a book instead. A book that does not only look at how this type of work has been booming, but also on what we thought we were going to achieve by now. This is a film from 1968 that has an idea about what we would be doing 24 years ago. And I was fascinated by the fact that somehow we didn't achieve all of the grand things we were supposed to do. But we got a lot of this. Spend a lot of time behind computers doing admin tasks and talent management and succession planning and project management and shared service. So we've not put a man to the moon for 50 years, but we've done a lot of that. So I was just curious, is this really the best use of our time? And why has this exploded? Because when we talk to organizations and ask them, is it becoming more bureaucratic, more centralized, more rule-bound, more conservative? Does it get harder to get tasks done? Do you have to ask a ton of people before you can do stuff? Then the overall agreement is, yes, it's more difficult. That's why we don't send men to the moon anymore, because the paperwork of getting the persons there will be simply overwhelming. And this has a huge impact. If we look at productivity growth, it has been declining for most Western countries since the 1950s. For some it's going up, but a lot of the global trend is that productivity growth is going down. And if we look at the number of ideas people have, it's not very impressive. Here we can see the amount of money we spend on research and development, and this is the actual number of ideas we're getting. And so today takes 18 people to get an idea it took one person to get in the 1950s. So we are spending a lot of time with very little productivity. And when we talk about this, people tend to say, yes, but that's because the world has become complex. And that seems sometimes like a bad excuse, because what is complexity really? And does complexity just happen? Does it just materialize in front of us? Or are there reasons for complexity? And a good way to solve this is looking at numbers. Like the Boston Consulting Group has done an analysis of this, looking at the numbers of layers and interface structures and coordinate bodies and scorecards, decision approvals, and counting it for 15 years to see if there was an increase, and absolutely there's been an increase in all of that. That's why things take so long. Proportion of people spending more than 14 hours per week in meetings have more than doubled. So people spend a lot of time in meetings. What are they doing in meetings? They're telling others what they're currently doing. Everybody's telling everybody what they're doing, and if they're not telling it in a meeting, they're writing it in a report. That has also increased. That means not doing the work, but telling somebody that you're doing the work, or that you have been doing the work, or plan to be doing the work. So again, we send papers around, not necessarily papers, but emails too, which we have seen 3 times the numbers of emails we receive. We don't necessarily read them. We don't know if people read them. We do know that they receive them with a lot of information. So that is what is eating your time. That means things take long. Hiring of a new employee. Data set I looked at for a 5-year period showed a 21% increase in just hiring new employees. Asking more questions, getting more information, having more meetings about it. Delivering office IT projects takes longer. It takes longer to enter a B2B sales contract. And I know that the current time, we all tell each other that things are going so fast. No, it's absolutely not going fast. It's going incredibly slow because we are doing a lot of work around work, which tends to take more time. So what can we do about that? Well, I'll try to present with you some reasons for it and some solutions for it. But a quick fix is getting a pandemic, apparently. Because in the pandemic, a lot of organizations realized that things that usually went very slow were suddenly speeded up. Just look at the COVID vaccine rollout, which was by light speed. A lot of organizations actually realized this. My favorite example is a US-based retailer that launched curbside delivery in 2 days versus an 18-month rollout plan. And you are going to ask the question with me, what were you going to spend 18 months at when you could do it in 2 days? Paper, meetings, milestone, finding out who's responsible for that delivery, forecasting, finding risks, etc., etc. We all know the excuses we have for not delivering. And then somebody might say, yeah, but that's fine, so we just have to work more hours, right? What is it, 69 hours the government want you to work in South Korea? But working more doesn't really seem to help. Why? Well, we look at the statistics, it clearly shows us that the places in the world where people work least hours, which is over here, they tend to produce the most. So in countries, and here we have South Korea here, we have a country that works pretty many hours, but does not produce as much as they do over here, where people work a lot less. So my point is that maybe we're kidding ourselves when we say just put more hours in there. Maybe we should start looking at, what do we do? What is work today? What is actually being done in our work? Where we can see that just adding more hours seems to have 0, if not even negative consequences for the type of work we do. So that, of course, made me interested in what do we do at work? If we can spend a lot of time at work with 0 output or very limited output, what is that we actually do? Which made me interested in statistics about meaningfulness about work. And I saw this fascinating survey done in the UK where people were asked, does your job make a meaningful contribution to the world? And 37% of persons say, no, it doesn't. What I do has very limited effect. Only 50% answered yes in the survey. And I thought that must be an outlier. let's see if we can get the same results from another country. And it was done in the Netherlands with an even more depressing result. So some people are generally out there feeling that maybe their work isn't that important at all. Maybe they're just wasting hours. And that made me interested in another phenomenon called Parkinson's law. And Cyril Northcote Parkinson was a military historian who looked at this in the 50s. He could see that bureaus and bureaucrats tended to just increase in size over time. Offices grew larger and larger, even though the jobs were the same. So it made him think that maybe work expands so as to fill the time available for its completion. Maybe if you have a number of hours for your job, no matter how much artificial intelligence you will get, you will still tend to spend the number of hours doing more work. And artificial intelligence wasn't even available at the time. And Parkinson's explanation for this was that what is there to do increases in importance and complicates proportionally with the time you need to fill. So again, can modern work expand naturally? Even though it sounds like a weird theory, the paper I saw this morning at the reception was just as long as the paper yesterday, right? So did the same amount of stuff happen in the world yesterday than today? No, of course not. We expanded it so it just filled 36 pages. So this seems to be a natural law of human involvement. But especially with work, it seems to be the case that it does seem to expand. So me and my co-writer went out and talked to people in Denmark and Britain and other places that said, yeah, being busy at work is simply not a problem anymore. We talked to a vice president of marketing, who said, we really only needed the marketing department 10 months a year. So for 2 months, I asked them to do a market analysis or visit suppliers or make a report that no one ever read or revisited again. They were selling video games, and he said, video games are popular Christmas presents. The first 2 months of the year, we do nothing. But we have to pretend we're doing something. So, of course, we make up something that sounds like work, which is writing reports and market analysis. And being, the fact is that these games are 10 years in development. A market analysis right here and now will do us no good anyway. So it is basically a waste of time. We talked to people who worked who were not vice presidents, but just working in the organization, saying, well, you can't leave the office at 4 o'clock, surely, even though you're done. So you have to look at what can I do today? And then you find out, for instance, that the newsletter sign-up button could get a new color. So let's try to do that. Let's find out if it would be better in red. And then he said, I could go down and just talk to the people in the IT department. They could make it red in two minutes. But that doesn't help me because I can't leave until 7 o'clock. So I'll just go to the communications department and they have a ton of ideas about how this button could be used, and maybe we should use our employer branding strategy. And then suddenly HR gets involved, and then they're interested in having meetings about this button. And what about customer analysis? And what about the generation millennial? How would they feel about this? Let's do a small survey on that, etc. It took a full month to change the button's color, because at no point anybody pulled the rug underneath this nonsense and said, it's not important. We are kidding ourselves. We're getting work like this. Work that essentially just puts more work on top of other work, but has very, very limited effect. We call that pseudo-work because it's work with no value, work that doesn't improve anything, and work that, if neglected, would not be noticed by anyone. I'm sure nobody would notice that the color of that button changed. I'm sure no of my clients looked at which PowerPoint template coding I used. It's complete nonsense to believe it's important, but we have created a sort of hall of mirrors where we exchange ideas about the value of these tasks. So the book came out, caused a lot of stir, and we started to survey it for real. How much people experience pseudo-work? In Denmark, 76% of Danes have at some point in their career done work that they think is entirely useless. 13% do it almost daily. That does not mean that their entire job is useless. It's only about 3% that claims that their entire job has no importance whatsoever. that if they just did not go into work, nobody would miss them. That's about 3%. I didn't, but because the book was out in Korea, a study done by Hankook Ilbo, I'm probably pronouncing that incorrect, did a survey of 300 workers and looked at how much pseudo-work do they claim to have been experienced. And then 47% had been assigned work unrelated to the core of their job, and 48% had done tasks whose purpose they could not justify. And the newspaper tried to look at different types of pseudo-work, ritual work, things that you have to do, that you don't understand why you have to do, and routine meeting and seminars with no output, 54%. They also did a diary study on it, where workers across sectors in Korea spent 27 to 30% of their working hours on pseudo-work. If you take that, look at the average working hours for Koreans, that would be 505 hours a year spent on unproductive activities. That is quite a lot. That will not send another man into space. So 2 hours, 28 minutes every day. Why is this happening? And I said Parkinson's law does not explain the whole thing. So let me at least try to assess 6 reasons for it, which I think would also be relevant in Korea. First of all, and that relates to Parkinson's law, if we still think that the number of hours equals productivity, what we will get is more hours. If we have this narrow mindset that it's just a matter of putting more hours, the more productivity we'll get, we will just get more hours. We will not necessarily get productivity. And again, quotes from the survey very easily spells that out. We just sit here for hours, that's South Korea, neither working nor resting. We can't leave because that would look lazy. If I don't submit something, I look like I'm not doing my job, so I'll fill the report with whatever I can find, even if no one will read it. I knew no one would ever read this, but I still had to fill it with fancy terms so it would look impressive. That's a man's job, right? Somewhere in Korea doing things that they're not terribly proud about, and certainly does not look like something that enhances productivity. And again, the reason why this happens is I believe that we are somehow stuck in a mindset that was developed in the industrial age where time mattered. The more time she could spend on the fish factory, the more she could produce. It made sense 100 years ago to think of times and punch clocks. Of course it did. But we've changed to work that look like this. We've changed to what we call backstage work in our book. And backstage work is work where you evaluate, study, communicate, consult, develop something, or sit and read through stuff, or you are analysts, or you might be a manager. And the type of work we do over here is not necessarily dependent so much on time as it used to. As a consultant, I lived through that again and again. A customer came to me and said, "How long does it take to do a SWOT analysis?" I have no idea. So we made up numbers. We basically thought how much money do they have? And we separated that with our hourly fee, and then we came up with a bogus number that they accepted. And we did not spend 50 hours on the SWOT analysis. We maybe spent 30. But everybody still believes there's a value in time. But not over here. I'll give you another example. Just imagine one day if the fish truck doesn't arrive here at the fish factory. What does that woman do? There's no fish. But she can clean her desk. She can maybe sharpen her knives. But there comes a point where the manager will say, "Go home. There's no need to be here because there's no fish." But over here, she will never go home. There's always stuff to be done when you're doing backstage work because you can always get more numbers for something. There's numbers out there, you just have to find them. Go ahead, find it. You can always ask more stakeholders. I talked to a communications guy who said, "We basically invented stakeholders. We found somebody to do meetings with. That was no problem." You can always communicate. You can inform more. Remember the intranet I talked about in the beginning, where I had to post a picture of myself? That intranet never said it's full. There's always more stuff to be put in there. So again, we can always communicate, make a subpage, web page, and another subpage again. We can achieve higher security. A lot of people at work are professionally nervous. Their job is to find risks, things that can go wrong. When your job is to find things that can go wrong, your enemy is human imagination, because all stuff can go wrong. So if you are sitting in risk analysis, your workday will also never end. There will be more and more things to be concerned about. You can always identify activities, indicate good results, you can communicate more pages, etc. What I'm trying to say is that the tragedy of modern backstage work is that you're never done. You can always do more. But with productivity statistics going down, what you're doing more is not helping. So you can always do this. More strategies, more co-creation seminars, more talent portfolios, etc. And a lot of the people we have doing administration work for us today are maybe not very talented at doing administration work. They are not very talented. They won't help you with a budget. They can't help you proofread a document. Maybe they are educated in the social sciences or humanities. They don't know how to do that, so they end up making this instead, which a lot of people never really asked for. Because we have over-educated population who feel that it's below them to sit and do simple admin work, it sounds much more impressive to do stuff like that. So if you can, make it sound more impressive by doing this, you will do that. So the first solution is that we start to measure outcomes and not hours. Skip the whole idea of hours. For most professions, not all, but for most professions, we can start to measure outcomes instead. And because there is a very valuable lesson for employers is that you own the product your employees produce. You don't own their time. Just think of that. You own the product, not the time. Because again, they could spend more time on doing the product, but why should they? Again, if you did that to consultants, a lot of them would be in trouble. Another problem is that the number of admin jobs and staff is exploding, and their incentives are wrong. And I'm not doing this to say that everybody who works in communications or risk analysis and HR should be fired. But we have seen a huge increase in the number of people doing stuff like that. If we look at the growth in the labor force since 1983, these are US numbers. Management, supervision, and administration has grown by 100%. That means managers, supervisors doing jobs that require supervision, by all other occupations have risen by 44%. So we are seeing a managerial class of administrators and analysts growing and growing. And again, absolutely not all of that is useless. But we have to remember these are backstage work. The more backstage work we get, the more Parkinson's law we will tend to get to. Another problem we see with bureaucracy is that the people who invent a lot of the admin tasks do not suffer the burden from them. What I mean by this is that we look at, here's a study on who experienced that their organization has become more bureaucratic, more rule-bound, it's more difficult to do my job. People who work in customer service and production and sales experience this the most. It's not experienced the same way by people who work in strategy and planning and HR. But a lot of the things that makes this difficult for them to do their work is invented by people down here. So they don't really suffer the consequences of their own ideas. These are the ones who say, let's change the PowerPoint template. And the people over here in sales say, oh, why do you do that? It'll just make my work harder, more difficult. But they don't suffer from it, so they keep inventing stuff. This happens in most organizations for reasons we've known about bureaucracy for 50 years, which tells us that admin and support functions tend to be very focused on what happens in the top management. If you're an HR partner, if you're a vice president of communication, you are interested in what do the CEO want? What do they think would be valuable? And if they ask for SWOT analysis and leadership principles, that's what you're going to get because they pay. The people in the line function who are doing the work, getting the product out, selling it, they don't pay the people here. So these people don't get interested in what they're doing. So one of the things we have to change is the incentives in an organization. So admin and support functions get interested in how can we help people make better products. And that is probably not reinventing the colors of PowerPoint templates every second year. It would probably helping them with some concrete things they need to do their work. So a solution to this would be reward staff functions according to their contribution to frontline work. And that can be done, and I've seen that done in organizations I've visited who have worked with this and saying, well, we want to make sure we evaluate the admin people, not according to what top-level senior managers want them to do, but what everybody else in the organization pushing the actual product need. That means that we change staff and admin functions from being corporate police, making sure everybody is doing the right thing, into what is actually a support function, where we actually try to find out how can I minimize people's workloads, not increase it. Of course, remembering that in an organization, a lot of the rules are to do with government legislation and, in my country, European Union legislation that you can't necessarily combat. But there's no reason why the organization should keep inventing more and more rules for itself. And then we come to problem 3, which is related to this, is that managers have become bureaucrats and not leaders. And that is a strong statement, but I've seen this in many organizations, that what used to be leadership has become small bureaucratic offices, making sure that people write the right reports, sending up the chain, getting more and more distance from the people they're going to help. And that has consequences. We actually know that managers and employees seem to be almost living on 2 different planets. That question I asked you we asked in the beginning about, do you feel the organization has become too complex? There's too much admin work to do. I don't have time to do my real tasks. 70% more employees than managers experience that. That tells us that management tend to have blind spots in the organization. They don't see that a lot of what they do ends up filling a lot of other people's time. This happens because in a lot of organizations, there's going to be deviations every day. There's going to be things we did not want to happen. We don't get the sales out we want. We get a problem or a fault in some machinery or whatever, or we get individual problems. That's unavoidable in every time there's humans around. But we tend to work around these solutions in a rather silly way. Is there too much stress? We get a stress policy. Does that work? No, it doesn't work anything. It doesn't help any problem, but we have 30 pages of paper that says we have a policy. Some people are always working from home and are never in the office. That's a big problem in Denmark, where I come from. Then we have a corporate policy on how much and who and when people can work from home. Then you can write down, know exactly what you're supposed to do. There's a sexual harassment, we get a code of conduct. Yeah, we could also get rid of the individuals doing the sexual harassment instead of new levels of bureaucracy where they can read what they're not supposed to do. Or a few people do not know when to reply to customers or use a tool incorrectly. Oh, disaster. Customers don't get the help, the support they want. Well, now everybody has to report on how quickly they report back to customers. And we measure that, and we try to get it down to 20 minutes this week, or maybe 15 minutes next week. And everybody in the office is thinking, yeah, but it's actually Betsy who's doing this all the time. She's the problem. Why don't you talk to Betsy instead of bothering everybody else with this problem? And that seems to be how a lot of organizations develop over time. Every time there are deviances, instead of actually looking at the stressed out individual, instead of talking to Betsy or the person working from home or the people doing sexual harassment, we get a lot of bureaucratic responses, a lot of paperwork, a lot of rules, a lot of corporate policing, and no leadership. Because leadership is about talking to these persons, getting close to them, finding out where their problem is. But if leaders become bureaucrats behind a desk handing out rules, that has nothing to do with leadership. But a lot of managers end up feeling that's what leadership is about. That's sitting, doing strategy in an office somewhere, instead of actually being with the people that they lead. Netflix was an organization who's interesting, inspiring when it comes to this. Netflix realized that we had to find the best people in the world. And the best people in the world do not want to be treated like children at their workplace. They want to be treated like adults. And adults want you to believe that they can do their job without a ton of rules, without a lot of reporting, without rules for this and this and this. So they started eliminating the bureaucracy, saying to people, we don't care if you fly overseas, if you think it's relevant to fly business class, fly business class. There is no rule in the employee handbook. If you think it's necessary, yeah, do that. There's no limit to how expensive a meal can be with a client. You are the judge. You're an adult. That changed Netflix entirely. Suddenly, people found it a much more pleasant place to work. And suddenly, everybody was being their own judge. For some people, it didn't work, but for a lot of people, it did. As the organization said, if you're careful to hire people who will put the company's interest first, who understand and support the desire for high-performance workplace, 97% of your employees will do the right thing. Most companies spend endless time and money writing and enforcing HR policies to deal with the problems the other 3% might cause. It's silly. Right? You spend too much time looking at the lowest common denominator. We look at the person not performing and we arrange the whole system towards that individual. And I think what happens is when leaders become bureaucrats, they do that because it's easier. They don't have to go through conflicts. They don't have to sit down and talk to employees. So I think having more managers with real people skills, able to look at that, and something I look at in my newest book, which is out in Korean this week, last week, I think, and it looks into how can we make managers who have more people skills that do not become bureaucrats, sending out, sitting behind the desk. And again, relating to hierarchy, we tend to see that the steeper the hierarchy is, the more pseudo-work we tend to get. And I think that's at least one of the interesting things relating to South Korea. There's no doubt that in South Korea you have a steeper hierarchy in the organizations than we have in Denmark and Scandinavia in general. That does not mean we don't have some of the same problems, but again, this would be a problem that's probably very relevant to us. So how come the steeper the hierarchy, the more pseudo-work? Well, some of it is, why do you want to be part of a hierarchy? Why do you want to become a manager? Is that because you want to help people, support people, be there for people? Or is it part of your personal career? Is it because you could see that if I just follow all the rules and do what I'm told, 2 years from now I'm going to be here, and if I continue to do that, I'll be here, and I'll just expand all the way through. And that's what hierarchical systems does to us. We tend to be much more concerned about how can we make sure that the people above us are satisfied so we can step up the hierarchy. And that's not necessarily doing the job. That's doing career. And sometimes doing job and doing career will be in opposite interests. So we actually know that the more managers we get, the more work for others it tends to create. We've seen that. We can see that the more levels you got of manager, you have junior manager, manager, director, vice presidents, executive vice presidents. Executive vice presidents produces jobs for 4.2 people, extra work of people telling the executive vice president what's going on, giving him he or she a forecast, or et cetera, et cetera. So we know the more management levels we get, the more excess work is pulled out to other people. Not necessarily producing much, but telling people in the hierarchy what's going on. We have a beautiful example of that from the Korean newspaper. The boss already has the data in the system, but likes to hear it directly. So I repeat it every day. Makes no sense. He could go in there, lazy person, but he doesn't want to. He wants to hear it from somebody else, probably because it makes him feel very important. And who don't want to be very important? And maybe at some point I can tell more people what to do, and that's my career. But again, it's harming this individual, and the data is out there. So that's the tendency for hierarchies to create this. Again, we know this from other studies. When getting ahead and staying as power is everything, and in a hierarchical system, getting up there, up, is a general rule, we know that the organization suffers. In a US survey here, 63% of employees believe that leaders' unwillingness to share power with others is a significant barrier to removing bureaucracy in the organization. Why? Well, because if you don't want to share power, you have to agree on everything. You have to stamp everything. You have to get it past your desk. It takes time. That's why things are slowing down. The managers have to be involved with this task and this task and this task, because if they're not, they don't seem powerful. And they don't want to seem powerless, so making sure that everything goes past them is necessary. We also know that the larger the organization and the more time people spend on doing politics, making sure that managers are satisfied, that means political skills becomes important. And the larger the organization is, the more political skills become important. Not making a good product, not making customers satisfied, not developing stuff, but making sure that your next career step is managed. Again, doesn't put a man on the moon, but certainly keeps people busy in an organization. Again, the larger the organization, the more skills of politics becomes important. Another reason why hierarchies has an effect on pseudo-work is that the more we escalate, the more systems we get a response. Again, if people solved problems when they occur, instead of asking more managers, the more things would be handled easily and quicker. And that's not because top management is stupid, but it's because top managers only have a limited number of tools in their toolboxes. If a top manager sees a problem, they have systems, new rules, policies to respond with, and nothing else. So that's what they're going to do. Every time, if a problem gets all the way to the top, it will tend to have a bureaucratic response. But if problems with a product or sales or a person is happening down here and is solved immediately, it doesn't have to take that long. This is one of my favorite examples. We had to send a monthly report to Paris headquarters with the latest progress on some projects, and we never heard anything. One day we just stopped sending it. We have been neglecting it now for 5 years and have still heard nothing. I know some of you have experienced this, right? Sending something, and at some point you didn't hear anything, but you keep sending it. I've talked to people who send reports down to head offices, writing in the middle of it, there are 2 bottles of whiskey at my office if you ever get to this point in the document. Nobody ever comes to pick up the 2 bottles of whiskey because nobody ever bothered to read it. A lot of organizations end up with reporting that have absolutely zero relevance because people are curious. I used to work as vice chairman of the biggest media corporation in Denmark. It's called Danish Broadcasting Corporation. I was responsible for 3,000 people. And sometimes I asked a silly question, sent it down the ranks, and got 30 PowerPoint pages in return, thinking, why did I ask this question? I could have called somebody, got an easy answer, but suddenly I'm here with 30 PowerPoint pages that I can't be bothered to read because they're simply too boring. So we have to try to get people interested in management for different reasons. And sometimes we have to try out horizontal promotions. By horizontal promotions, I mean, why do a lot of people want to become managers? They want to become managers because they want freedom to decide more. They want interesting jobs. They want more money. Then give them that instead of management jobs. Find other ways to reward people horizontally instead of sending them up the chain. And again, encourage de-escalation. Solve problems on the lowest possible level and bring power to where the knowledge is. That has been done in the US military on U-boats and other things, where captains have said, we simply cannot take too many decisions. We have to rely on the people, the soldiers, doing the everyday job. Because we become a bottleneck as managers. It takes too long. So we have to solve things on the lowest possible level. If they can't solve it, then we escalate it. But they're supposed to solve it themselves. Problem 5, no one is held accountable for bureaucracy. And that's a major problem. We can always blame everybody else for paperwork. We can always say that it's a reason some anonymous bureaucrat or governmental institution, etc., are the reason why things are more complex. But that's not entirely true. We are ourselves responsible. When I talked about everybody sitting in meetings, right? Or everybody sending emails, computers do not send out meeting requests automatically. People make decisions every day on who is going to be invited to that meeting, how long is the meeting going to take. You decide that. You can't blame the IT system for that. You can't blame the IT system for how many emails it sends out. You send emails. Humans take decisions. Again, in this organization, some humans at the upper echelons of the organization had a meeting. They spent, all in all, 7,000 hours on each year, top management team. But people had to prepare them for that meeting. That took another 20,000 hours just to prepare documents for the 7,000-hour meeting. But there were actually people below them preparing for the other group, spending 63,000 hours, and so on to 220,000 hours, to in all 300,000 hours of meetings, just meeting times, to prepare for a top manager's 7,000 hours of meeting. That is extraordinary numbers, right? That tells us about what if they skipped that meeting or just put it in half? It escalates down in the organization. And all of us have responsibilities for avoiding death by meeting. And we are spending more and more time in meetings. So how could we do that? We could make time limits. Say meetings should never be more than 20 minutes. Parkinson's law works in the reverse too. If you have 1 hour for a meeting, it's going to take 1 hour. People will find stuff to talk about for an hour. If you limit it to 20 minutes, it might, not always, but it might just take 20 minutes. So I talked with an organization who has a 4-day work week. One of the ways they solved this was saying every minute is 20 minutes. They changed the default in Outlook. You can do that if you want to. A lot of the meetings we have are 1 hour because that's the default in Outlook. That's the reason for it. So change the default, get shorter meetings. Maybe have meeting-free times or meeting-free days. A MIT study has shown that 3 days of having no meetings in an organization improves almost everything. Improves productivity, communication, etc. 3 days of having no meetings is better than 5 days with meetings. Participant limitations. Say only 5 people in a meeting. And maybe most important, you can leave a meeting if you do not need to be there. Say, I am sorry, it might be a great meeting for you, but I'm wasting my time. I think Korea is a very polite society where that becomes difficult. I come from a country that's not very polite, so that's easy. But again, we have to work with stuff like this and sometimes be more honest and say, this meeting is simply not very important for me. And sometimes you could just opt out on meetings and say, I don't want to be there anyway. But lastly, some of the stuff has to do with how our minds work. If I ask you to correct this so it becomes even, just think about it. You have to correct it so it becomes even. How many here put another brick underneath that mentally? Hands up. How many remove the block over here? Oh, that's good. That's a good way to solve it. But a lot of people still want to put more blocks in there when they find a problem. They just add more stuff. And we're drowning in stuff. We need somebody to take things out. And that's one of the last things we have to create. We have to create what I call key administrative indicators. We have to keep track on the bureaucracy we create. We have to keep track on the number of meetings, keep track on the number of documents, keep track of everything. You know the old story of the frog that's being boiled? It doesn't know it's being boiled, so it doesn't jump out. It's a myth. The frog does jump out. But the story is used to tell us that sometimes we don't see what's going on around us, so we just continue. The same with bureaucracy. The more we can be noticing it, the more we can do about it. So maybe decide on a ratio of number of staff to line function. Say, I work with companies who said there can only be one administrative person for every 10 people actually doing the important work. So we keep the bureaucracy down and reduce the number of management levels and say it can only be 5, no more than that. Count the number of rules, policies, and employee handbook pages every year. I know that's putting another bureaucratic task on you, and I'm sorry, but sometimes it's actually a good idea to measure this, to find out why is the employee handbook getting larger every year? Is there anybody responsible for taking pages out? There usually isn't. So it expands over time. But the more we set a rule and say, why is this happening? The more we know the increase, the more we tend to think about it. Demand one rule in, one rule out, or 2 rules out. You can't put another meeting in there without taking out another meeting. You can't make another mandatory read without taking one out. You can't make another SOP, standard operating procedure, without taking one out. You make the bureaucrats responsible for removal. It's an easy thing. I've seen it done. But you need to be interested in the amount of work that is there. And the last one, problem, a culture of obedience, mistrust, pleasing, and looking busy creates what I call the work theater. If looking busy is the badge of honor, and saying I'm busy makes you an important person, then everybody will keep saying they're busy. And they will run around with large paper to seem like they're important people who have an important job to do. And what pseudo-work was mainly about was exposing that sometimes our work becomes a theater. It becomes something we pretend. So I want us to do task archaeology together. Ask people to identify pseudo-work. Again, look at the quotes from the survey here. That's people who know what the pseudo-work is. That's people we should talk to. And lastly, I want to use just an example of this done in a bakery in Germany, where they actually asked the employees, so what is the pseudo-work you have here? What's the number of useless tasks you're asked to do, like operational checklists and daily protocols? Again, asking stupid things. Smile at the customer. Who's not going to do that? Finish the old package of coffee beans before starting a new package. Passing along information to the daily shift. They said, let's just get rid of that. And sales increased in the number of shops who removed it. They took half of the shops, removed it, the other half kept it. They increased sales of up to 5% in some cases and experienced a lot of other great things. And you know what? The most fascinating thing was that they saw no relationship between the amount of time people reported that they spent on these duties prior to the experiment and their productivity increase. That means it was not because they spent a lot of time before on these documents that they were more productive. It was because they were more happy. It was a more pleasant place to work. It didn't make people feel fake. And again, back to the last quotes here from the Korean survey, they show that people are not proud of doing pseudo-work. They feel fake. They feel that their work is a waste of time. It's killing them inside. So we could get more productivity for people to be more happy at the place they work. But I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope we will be able to see the light together somehow if we talk more about it and expose it more than taboo it and put it in the closet. So thank you so much for listening and for inviting me.